Tiny House Prepper.
Live simple, live free.
Hi there everybody, I'm Bill.
And I'm Elizabeth with Tiny House Prepper.
So you look around the world, you watch the news, you see what's happening, you start to realize that we have a very unsettled future, I guess you can say. There's a lot of concern about what's going to be happening in the future, so you decide it's maybe that you need to start prepping. So where do you start? How do you do that? I've known some people who've decided to start prepping, and they'll go out and they'll buy 50 pounds of beans and rice and a couple of candles and a couple of extra batteries, and they think they're good. Well, it's a whole lot more involved than that. It's a whole lot more difficult than you might think it is.
But if you have a plan, it actually could be a whole lot easier than you think it is also. And so what we really want to try to do is to help you to come up with a plan so that you can really figure out how to go about feeling like that you're more prepared, that you are more prepper for whatever you may need in your life. And we want it to be something that's going to fit you and fit your family's lifestyle and what you need.
That's right. So grab a pencil and paper, and we're going to go through and talk about different systems, different categories that you need to write down so that you can actually get a written plan so you know exactly what you're doing. The first thing is to just simply set your goals, what your prepper goals are. How long do you want to prep for? Do you want to be prepared for 2 weeks, or 2 months, or 2 years? It really depends on how difficult you think things might become in the future. There's a lot of people, a lot of preppers that use the terminology SHTF. We don't like that terminology. We don't talk that way. So we're going to use EOW, which stands for the end of the world.
Quote, quote, end of the world.
End of the world. The end of the world scenario. So when I talk about EOW, you know what I'm talking about. So there's what I call EOW light, and then there's full-blown EOW. EOW light basically is if part of the system goes down, part of the grid goes down. For instance, the electrical grid goes down, but everything else is still there. There's still groceries available in the store and all that kind of stuff. Or the other way around, you know, the dollar crashes and truckers can't buy fuel, so there's no food in the stores, but you still have electricity. We still have our government, we still have the police, all that sort of thing, where only part of it goes down. And then a full-blown EOW is where there's a total collapse of everything, which turns into total anarchy and, you know, no police and no food and no electricity. And so it just depends on how radical you want to get, I guess you can say that, in your planning. And so just decide what you want to do. Are you planning for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years? And are you planning for a total meltdown or just a EOW light, which is, you know, you lose electricity for a month or 2?
Well, also, we've talked about this also before, but there's, we're kind of closer to the coast, so all it takes is a big hurricane or just some crazy thing happening. There's a lot of reasons it can also just be a very good idea to have some preparation in terms of bad, crazy weather things that could happen, or just, situations where your own personal family economy for some reason ends up collapsing. So there's, we don't know when and where anything is going to be necessarily happening, but we are trying to encourage you to feel like that you have some backup prepared in your life so that you will be able to do the things that you really need to.
All right. Good.
So.
Okay, you want to talk about the systems?
Yeah, I think that probably the very first thing that I really would want to stress to everyone, and when I've talked about my tiny house system, I did kind of touch on this also, But what you really have got to do is become very, very aware of what it is that you do and need in your life. And so, take a little bit of time for your own life and think about things that you do on a regular basis, and how you like to eat. What are the things that you really need to do? Do you have regular medicine that you need to take? Do you have sweethearts of pets that are going to need some love and attention? So just very consciously think about your life, and think about what are things that I would not want to have to give up if everything suddenly got a whole lot harder. Walk through every room in your house. Walk through into your garages, into your storage areas, and look about it and think about what you've got and the things that you need on a regular basis. You have a daily routine. People have basically like weekly routines. There are going to be things that you do all the time that are going to be important to you to maintain. And also think about things that come along periodically that you also need to be able to be prepared for. Now we're going to start out with the big three. And these are fundamental, basic, for anybody to be able to be okay. And there are a lot other things involved, but these are the three big ones. Do I have food? Now I'll start with the really big one. Do I have water?
Right.
That is the biggest, by far the biggest factor that you have to consider.
Everybody always says you got to have food and water. Food and water is most important. Water and food, that's the most important.
Right.
You can live a couple months without food. You can only live a couple days without water.
Right.
So water is the most important, and then food.
And then to have a heated shelter.
Yeah.
Depending on where you live, of course, but just to have a roof over your head, have some kind of shelter, and enough heat somehow that you're going to be okay if the weather's really bad. So those are the fundamentals that you absolutely have got to think about in terms of being okay. It was really cool for Bill when Hurricane Sandy happened, and I was gone out of town, and he was alone in our home for 7 days with no electricity for that week, and to realize that he really wasn't okay. He was really set up to be okay, suddenly losing electricity even just for the week.
Yeah.
So
let's talk first about water, which we said is the most important thing. Water is so basic, we don't even think about it. We just take it for granted.
In fact, we really do, because many places in the world it is not something you can take for granted.
Right.
We're really blessed.
So you got to think about sources of water, or possibly storage of water. Where can you get water? In the EOW, in the end of the world, where can you get your water source? Or can you store it? Storing it for long term, to me, is not really practical. You might be able to store a couple weeks or a month's worth, but any more than that, it's really difficult because it's bulky and heavy and everything else. So
yeah, where do you put that much water?
Right. So you have to come up with some sort of a source for water, and then once you do, you got to make sure it's drinkable.
Right. Well, in fact, I think we need to touch on this. Initially, the most important thing is to make sure you're going to have drinking water. We take it for granted so much, but dehydration is very, very dangerous. And so drinking water. But then on top of that, thinking about, would you like to be able to brush your teeth? Can you use water for food preparation? For enough personal cleanliness. In other words, there's different stages of needing water, but you certainly have to start out being sure it's potable enough that you can safely drink it.
Right. If you have a water source that it's questionable, you have to be able to drink it. You have to be able to filter it or purify it some way. Of course, you can boil it if you have a wood stove available or on a fire outside. That'll take care of all pathogens, but it's not going to take care of heavy metals or chemicals.
Right, right. Although at least you can get the E. coli and pathogens and stuff out of the water.
So really, the best thing that I can see is to have a really good filtration system, so that you can one that'll take out the heavy metals and take out chemicals as well as all of the pathogens. Another thing that you can do, and it doesn't sound very appetizing, but it does work, is you can use bleach.
Very
and
good.
I think it's just a tablespoon of bleach in a gallon of water.
You sure it's a whole tablespoon?
Or is it a teaspoon? I don't even know for sure.
That's something that's easy enough to Google to find out for sure. But bleach is one way you can kill pathogens.
You can research it. In fact,
I'd rather boil it.
A lot of drinking water in the cities, if you drink water out of the tap, it tastes like bleach. That's because they use
the chlorine kills all the
chlorine in it to kill it. So that if you have a gallon of bleach, then you can pretty much purify anything. Like I said, it wouldn't taste very good, but it's as long as you don't put too much bleach in there, you're okay.
It really takes a very small amount. Actually, having some bleach on hand is just an extremely good idea,
Right.
just in case.
So what we are planning to do, we have a fairly good size stream not far from here. That's
It's a healthy, running, normal
yeah. It's got
little river.
it's got rapids and waterfalls and things like that, but it's a healthy mountain stream, and so we'll be hauling water back from there and then filtering the water through a filter that sits on the counter over there. And
Yeah, one thing we want to really, I'm assuming people probably know this, but you don't know for sure. I don't care how beautiful a body of water is, how fast flowing. I don't care if you're way up in the mountains, up in the Rockies. You cannot drink water straight out of a stream. There isn't anywhere
Right.
that you couldn't end up with coliforms and different kinds of things that could make you have horrible dysentery symptoms. You just don't want to mess with it. Don't ever drink water that has not been treated somehow, unless it's coming out of your own well, or out of a spring, straight out of the rock. So
next.
So we're going to be bringing it and filtering it from the creek.
Yeah, so we'll bring it
from
up from the creek and
Yeah.
we'll filter it in our filter.
Yeah.
So then the next major category is food. This one is actually the one that's the most obvious.
Yeah.
But
that's the
like I
first thing people
said,
think of.
most people when they think about storing food, they go out and buy beans and rice. Well, you can live on beans and rice. The combination of the two makes a perfect protein, and you can live on it. But it is very, very boring. And quite frankly, most people don't know how to cook with beans and rice. You might cook it as a side dish now and then, but if that's what you were eating all the time, how do you even prepare it? What do you do with it? And you would get so sick of it so fast.
I think something that we've really, I know for me as sort of the wife in the situation, I've really gone through a real fundamental shift in how I look at having food stored just in case. I no longer really feel like it's a wise idea to do something strange and different for my food stores that I would not know or want to use on an everyday basis. Somebody gave us a comment that we just got that was really a good...
I was going to write that down and read that. Let me look it up and I'll get back with you with that comment.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have a Tiny House Prepper Facebook group. If you're not on a part of that, it's a great place. You can become a part of that. And here is a comment on that Facebook group from Keith in Florida. And he says, here's my 2 cents. Make sure you are buying things that you would normally use anyway. It seems obvious, but I've read about people buying a year's supply of food that they don't care for and they won't use unless they're starving. So the point is, don't get unusual stuff that you don't know how to use and you wouldn't probably use anyway unless, like Keith said, unless you were starving. So if you don't normally use beans and rice, then don't get beans and rice or just get a small portion of it.
And we're going to be getting into this more later, but you don't want to get something that you don't know how to fix it. And also, I've known of people, be careful, I've known of people that got a great big nice thing of dry beans or something in a big old barrel, and by the time they realized that years had gone by and they hadn't really used it, it didn't stay good. And so you really need to know the food is going to stay really safe, that the nutrition and flavor are going to be there, and that it's going to be something that'll be kind of normal, won't need a lot of crazy, unusual preparation, and that you will know how to fix it, Now, that's going to touch on 2 things. I know that there's a lot of prepackaged meals out there that are super easy for somebody to fix. You just put water in them, and there are really good places for those. Sometimes for camping, there's different things where those can be really, really handy. But we really know that over the long haul, we would get really sick and tired of the same things over and over. I can't have the gluten, that's a real problem. And also, I can't really control what goes into it in terms of chemicals or what kind of seasoning or whatever. So sometimes the pre-planned stuff, I don't think in the long run is as good of an idea. You just need good basic food. But it has to be food that you can enjoy and that you know kind of how to use. And so once again, I don't really recommend going out and buying, 2 50-gallon barrels of beans and 2 50-gallon barrels of rice just because they form a good protein. that's very bland, and you're not going to know what to do with it. So
Right.
anyway, that.
So what we do, we have several different food sources. Our main one is from Thrive Life freeze-dried foods. If you've watched anything on my channel, you've seen lots of videos about that, so we won't go into a whole lot of detail. If you're interested in what that is, look around on my channel. You'll see a lot of other videos about Thrive Life freeze-dried foods. And then we use canned goods that for stuff that Thrive doesn't have,
Right.
and then we use some dried goods like pasta and things like that.
And we do have some beans and rice.
Yes, we do.
They're sealed in the containers. The spackle comes in, but they're not. Yeah.
5-gallon buckets.
Yeah, they're sealed in there.
But the
In
point
individual packages.
the point with Thrive is that you can cook all of your same old menus just like you always do, just using freeze-dried food instead of fresh food. We use it every day. It's great. And so when in the end of the world, we won't have any change in our diet because we will eat from our stores or from our food stores just like we do now. So we don't have to try to figure out what is this weird stuff that all of a sudden we have to eat and discover we don't like it.
You know, as a Christian, the Lord, I was just thinking sometime about the things that are in Revelation, and they know that some rough times can come, and that many Christians live under different kinds of persecution. And I was thinking about wanting to really make sure that I really continue to take a stand and never be ashamed of the name of Jesus, and really take a stand for the Lord. And I know that God really spoke to me one time, and He said it's not really going to get easier to do that when it gets harder. You need to make that your life now. And that's true in terms of my relationship with the Lord and standing up for Him, but it's also so true in terms of how we eat and how we live if things get rough like that. You don't want to suddenly try to start learning things that you don't know how to do when everything gets really hard, because it won't be easier when it gets harder.
Right.
You need to feel like that you know how to do it soon and now, so that you feel like, okay, I can handle that if the time would come.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
Now, as you plan your food storage, you also have to plan in some fun things.
That's really important.
Popcorn, especially if you've got kids, you got to have
Yes.
some fun things. Popcorn. Thrive has things in the can that are like cake mixes and brownie mixes and things like that that are good for 25 years. So plan on some fun stuff too to be able to eat, so you don't get so bored with just wholesome food.
Well, and I don't tend to use those all the time, although they're very nice, but I like having some in stores.
Right.
I tell you what, when things are rough, if things are kind of tough, just to know that on somebody's birthday you can somehow manage to come up with a little plate of brownies, even if you don't really have an oven kind of situation, even just fry them over a fire or something, so there's a treat, can make all the difference in the world.
And then don't forget about spices.
Yes.
If you're going to be cooking your own meals and you use spices, make sure you've got enough spices stored that you can continue to make them taste good instead of bland.
And of course that includes definitely having things like salt, having things like baking powder, baking soda, which soda is good for a lot of things. Yeah. Think about, what do I really use, and would I have it down the road?
Yeah. And then there's gardening, which is basically more along the lines of homesteading. It's a
good idea.
It's a different philosophy to approach the end of the world, but a lot of people take that approach rather than prepping. Some people do both. We did a video with our son, who's a homesteader. It's a video called Prepping versus Homesteading, and we compared the two. So, if you have a chance or the ability to do some gardening, and if you're going to do that, learn how to can it, the food that you grow, so that you can preserve it.
Yeah.
And
learn about how to make sure you're going to have seeds and how to propagate for the next year.
Right. And then there's also foraging. That's not something that most Americans do nowadays.
I wish I knew more about it.
Most people don't have a clue how. We don't know much about it either, but we would like to learn. I'd like to learn.
Yeah. I mean, dandelions, that's apparently are very good for you and can be definitely eaten, and I certainly can grow a big crop of those.
The roots of cattails, if you pull them up, and apparently the tuber down there is kind of like eating a potato, and it's very good and very nutritious.
Yeah.
Of course, certain kinds of mushrooms, if you know what you're doing, or you'll kill yourself if you don't.
I would be really cautious with foraging mushrooms unless you're sure of what you're doing, because they're very poisonous if they're not right.
Foraging is another way. If you but you got to begin to learn to do that now if you're going to do that. You can't wait until the balloon goes up to figure out how to do that. So, and then the other big section of we talk about food and water and heated shelter.
Yes.
Now, just about everybody has a shelter of some kind, unless you're homeless. But most of you watching this, I assume, aren't. Not many people sit under a bridge, watching YouTube. So,
if you are homeless, I pray God will work something out
yes,
for you.
amen. But you probably have a home, but is it heated? Do you live in a climate where it needs to be heated? How are you going to heat it when the power goes out? Do you have an oil burner that takes electricity to run? Obviously, if the power goes out, you're not going to have heat. Some options. Propane is good. Of course, you can run out of propane.
Yeah.
But you can store it in big tanks out behind your house. You can store quite a bit of propane.
Mm-hmm.
Propane is good for you can have heaters that run without electricity that are propane fired. Also, your stove in your kitchen can be propane powered without any electricity. Another obvious one is wood. I like wood because unless you live in the middle of Manhattan someplace, you can always find wood out in the woods someplace. And it's a lot of work, but it would always be available in the end of the world. So, and then you got to think about, okay, I got a good wood stove. It works well. We have our little mini cubic wood stove. It's about this big. I've also got videos about that on our channel here.
Yeah, I heated our whole home last winter.
Yeah, it did. But
then little, but it worked.
But then you have to think about how you're going to cut that wood.
That's right.
If you can't get gasoline for your chainsaw and your gas-powered wood splitter, how are you going to cut that wood?
You think processes through to the end.
Right.
Is there somewhere where this would break down because I can't do this one step?
So we have one of those old-fashioned cross-cut saws, great big long things, got a handle on each end, and two people use it and cut, to cut through the logs. And then we have a manual hydraulic log splitter that I put the log in there and I crank it like this, and it moves it and splits the wood. So I'm all set up to be able to cut and split my wood, even if I can't get any electricity for my chainsaw. Now, as long as we have electricity, I'm going to use that chainsaw.
Sure.
But I'm set up to be able to do that even without the chainsaw. It is possible to live in a house without heat. It's better to live in a house without heat than it is to live in a tent without heat. And when I was in the Army, I spent a lot of time, and I was never in combat, praise God, but I spent a lot of time in training in the winter in Colorado or in Germany where it was down near zero and we're living in tents for, a couple weeks and going out for...
Korea.
Yeah, and Korea was the same way too. Going out for guard duty in the foxholes, and it was... Lows were near zero and highs were 10 or 15, and we were out there for weeks at a time like that, and we survived it. And so... And I've also done a lot of winter mountaineering, ice climbing, backpacking, winter camping, and that sort of thing. It is very definitely possible to do, and I'd rather live in a house in the cold than out in the woods or in a tent. You just got to have the proper clothing, the proper equipment, down clothing, down sleeping bags for your bed, and that sort of thing. But if I can avoid that, I want to. So, okay, now let's talk about solar. Solar power, it's new.
Great stuff. Oh.
Yeah, it's new. It's high tech. It's sexy. It's the way to go.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah, it does.
And the new wind powered stuff they've got now.
Right.
Yeah.
However, we don't have any solar power. It's not that we don't want it.
We'd love to get some.
It's not that we're against it and we're too old and fuddy-duddy to accept it or anything like that. We just have bigger priorities of things to spend our money on right now. Once we get these other things fulfilled, then we'll probably be looking at solar at some time down the road.
Yeah, I'd love it. Or where we live, something with some good wind generation or something.
Yeah, we're up here on top of a mountain, and there's a lot of wind here, and a windmill up on the roof would do wonders for that. But like for instance, this summer, our big project for this summer is to tear down our little shed that we've got and build a nice big new shed. All of our money is going into that this summer.
Everything's done cash, so it's all gone.
Right. Yeah, we're not going into debt for anything. So, and I would rather buy an extra 6 months worth of food than invest the money in solar right now. Now, once we, I mean, because you can't eat a solar array, you know. But once we get to where we want to be with all of the other emergency supplies, then we'll probably look at solar. So.
But in the meantime, we're set up for old school.
Yes, we're going old school. We're going mechanical with a lot of things, and we'll show you that. Actually, we've covered really the four basics: the water, food, shelter, and solar.
Heat,
Yeah, we've given you a lot of technical information about solar, right?
Yes. Apparently, it's really cool stuff, and it works really well.
Basically, that we don't have it yet. But so we're going to end this video with this, and we're going to go into part 2. And in part 2, we'll go through your whole household, and we'll talk a lot about things systems in your house that you probably don't even think about, that you need to think about and you need to plan for.
Right, to be prepared.
To be prepared.
Yes, yes.
So.
Absolutely. So we don't want to make it too long, so this is kind of like the overview, and then we're going to do another one, and we'll get into some of we'll try to give you a lot of ideas, so that maybe there'll be something that maybe you hadn't thought of.
Right.
Try to help.
Okay. Very good. If this has been helpful so far, then like it and subscribe, and join us in part 2.
Yes. Dun ta da! Part 2 is coming.
And
Yes.
as always,
Live simple.
live free.
Live free.
See you in part 2.
Bless you guys. Bye-bye.